The sun hung in the sky like a merciless judge over the Arizona territory, and Frank Sawyer was about to make a decision that would change everything he thought he knew about destiny. He had been riding through the valley outside Calico for 3 days straight, his throat parched and his lips cracked from the endless heat that seemed to radiate from the very ground itself. The drought had been devastating this part of Arizona for months now, turning what used to be green pastures into cracked earth that looked like broken pottery. Cattle had died by the hundreds, and farmers were abandoning their homesteads, heading east or west, anywhere but here. Frank had stayed because this land was in his blood, because his father had built the Sawyer Ranch with his own 2 hands before a fever took him 5 years ago, and because leaving felt like admitting defeat to the desert itself. The road to Calico wound through red rocks and dried scrub brush, and Frank was making this trip to sell what few cattle he had left. The money would not be much, but it might be enough to keep him going through another season if the rains ever came. He was 26 years old, broad-shouldered from years of hard work, with dark hair that curled at his collar and eyes the color of creek water when the light hit them right. Women in town had tried to catch his attention over the years, but Frank had always been too focused on survival to think much about courting. That was before he saw her. She was standing on the side of the road about a mile outside Calico, next to a wagon with a broken wheel. The heat shimmered off the ground in waves, making her appear almost like a mirage at first. Frank blinked hard, wondering if his mind was playing tricks on him, but she was real. She wore a simple dress that might have been blue once but had faded to something closer to gray, and her dark hair was pulled back from her face. Even from a distance, Frank could see she was in trouble. He urged his horse forward, and as he got closer, he could make out more details. She was young, probably around 22 or 23, with a face that would have been beautiful if it was not currently flushed red from the sun and twisted with worry. She had one hand shading her eyes as she looked down the empty road, clearly hoping for help that had not yet arrived. "Madam," Frank called out, tipping his hat as he approached. "Looks like you could use some assistance." She turned to face him, and Frank felt something shift in his chest. Her eyes were the most striking shade of amber he had ever seen, like honey held up to the light. Despite her obvious distress, there was a strength in the set of her jaw that told him she was not the type to give up easily. "My wheel broke about an hour ago," she said, her voice hoarse from thirst. "I have been trying to fix it myself, but I cannot seem to get the axle to lift properly." Frank dismounted and walked over to inspect the damage. The wheel had not just broken, it had practically shattered. One of the spokes had snapped clean through, and the rim was cracked in 2 places. This was not something that could be fixed on the side of the road. "Where are you headed?" Frank asked, straightening up and wiping the sweat from his brow. "Calico," she replied. "I am supposed to meet my brother there. He sent for me from back east after our mother passed. Said there was work for me at the general store he runs with his wife." "My condolences about your mother," Frank said, and he meant it. He knew what it was like to lose family. "Thank you," she said softly. Then she seemed to sway slightly on her feet. Frank was at her side in an instant, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. "When was the last time you had water?" "This morning," she admitted. "I ran out about 2 hours ago. I thought I would reach Calico before it became a problem, but then the wheel broke and I have been standing here in the sun ever since." Without hesitation, Frank pulled his canteen from his saddle and handed it to her. "Drink. Slowly now, not too fast or you will make yourself sick." She took the canteen with trembling hands and drank carefully, her eyes closing in relief as the water touched her lips. When she finished, she handed it back to him with a grateful look that made Frank feel 10 feet tall. "I am Amelia Vaughn," she said. Thank you for stopping. Not many would, given how things have been lately with the drought and all. Frank Sawyer, he replied, and I could not very well leave a lady stranded in this heat. It would not be right. Amelia smiled then, just a small curve of her lips, but it was enough to make Frank forget about the heat for a moment. Then she looked up at the blazing sun and winced, bringing her hand up to shade her face again. Frank made his decision without thinking twice. He reached up and took off his wide-brimmed hat, the one his father had given him years ago, the one he wore every single day regardless of weather or occasion. He placed it gently on Amelia's head, adjusting it so it would shade her face properly. "You need this more than I do right now," he said. Amelia looked up at him with those honey-colored eyes, and for a moment she seemed speechless. Then that smile returned, wider this time, transforming her entire face into something radiant despite the dust and heat surrounding them. "I cannot take your hat," she protested, but her hands came up to hold it in place as she spoke. "You already have," Frank replied, and he found himself returning her smile. "Besides, I have got a thick skull. The sun does not bother me much." That was a lie. He could already feel the heat beating down on his uncovered head, making his scalp prickle. But seeing Amelia's smile made it worth it. Then something strange happened. The air around them seemed to shift, growing suddenly cooler. Frank looked up and saw dark clouds gathering on the horizon, moving fast across the sky. That was odd. The weather had been nothing but clear skies for months. Not a single cloud, not a hint of moisture in the air. "Is that," Amelia said, her voice filled with wonder, "is that rain?" It seemed impossible, but the clouds were definitely there, rolling in from the north like a cavalry charge. The wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of wet earth, a scent Frank had almost forgotten existed. "We should get you into town before the storm hits," Frank said, shaking himself out of his shock. "I will tie your wagon to my horse and lead you in. It is only about a mile." "But the wheel," Amelia started to say. "We will go slow. The wagon can limp along on 3 wheels if we are careful." Frank worked quickly, unhitching the horse from Amelia's wagon and tying the whole contraption to his saddle. It was not ideal, but it would work. He helped Amelia climb back onto the wagon seat, making sure she had his hat secured on her head, then mounted his own horse and started the slow journey toward Calico. The clouds continued to gather overhead, darkening the sky in a way that should have been ominous, but instead felt like a blessing. Frank kept glancing back at Amelia to make sure she was managing all right, and each time their eyes met, she smiled at him. Each time she smiled, the wind seemed to gust a little stronger, the clouds seemed to gather a little faster. They were halfway to town when the first drops began to fall. It started as a light sprinkle, fat drops that splattered against the dry ground and created tiny puffs of dust. Then it grew heavier, turning into a steady rainfall that soaked through Frank's shirt in seconds and drummed against the brim of the hat on Amelia's head. Frank tilted his face up to the sky, letting the water wash over his skin, feeling like he had been given a gift from heaven itself. Behind him, he heard Amelia laugh, a sound of pure joy that cut through the sound of the rain. Frank turned to look at her and saw her sitting on the wagon seat with her arms outstretched, his hat still on her head, her face turned up to receive the rain with an expression of absolute delight. "It is raining," she called out to him over the sound of the downpour. "Frank, it is actually raining," he laughed too, unable to help himself. "I can see that." By the time they reached the outskirts of Calico, the rain was coming down in sheets. The streets were already turning to mud, but nobody seemed to care. People were running out of buildings, dancing in the downpour, hugging each other and shouting with joy. Children splashed in rapidly forming puddles while their parents looked on with tears streaming down their faces, and Frank knew those tears were not just from the rain. He led Amelia's wagon to the general store, which sat on the main street between the saloon and the doctor's office. A man came running out, his face breaking into a grin when he saw Amelia. "Amy," he shouted, using what Frank assumed was a nickname. The man was probably in his early 30s, with the same dark hair as Amelia and a kind face. "You made it, and you brought the rain with you." Amelia climbed down from the wagon, and her brother swept her into a hug, both of them getting thoroughly soaked in the process. Frank stood back, suddenly feeling like an intruder on their reunion. He should probably head on to the cattle auction and take care of his business. But then Amelia pulled back from her brother and turned to Frank, her face glowing with happiness. "Thomas, this is Frank Sawyer. He found me on the road when my wagon broke down. If it was not for him, I would still be stuck out there." Thomas extended his hand to Frank, his grip firm and grateful. "Thank you for helping my sister. You have no idea how worried I have been. Come inside out of the rain, both of you. The least I can do is offer you a hot meal and a dry place to sit." Frank started to decline, but Amelia caught his eye, and the hopeful look on her face made the refusal die in his throat. "I suppose I could spare a few minutes," he said. Inside the general store, Thomas's wife, a plump woman named Catherine with rosy cheeks and a warm smile, fussed over both of them, providing towels and hot coffee while they dried off. The store was well stocked despite the drought, with shelves lined with canned goods, fabrics, tools, and sundries. Clearly, Thomas ran a successful business. "So you are a rancher?" Thomas asked Frank as they sat around a small table in the back room of the store. "Trying to be," Frank admitted. "The drought has been hard on everyone. I am actually in town to sell off some cattle. I have been holding on to them as long as I could, but I need the money to keep the ranch going." "It has been terrible," Thomas agreed. "We have lost half the businesses in town over the past 6 months. People just giving up and moving on. I was starting to think we might have to do the same, but now, with this rain," he looked out the window where water was still pouring down, "maybe things will turn around." Amelia had removed Frank's hat and was holding it carefully, running her fingers along the brim. "I should return this to you," she said, offering it back to him. Frank took the hat, but part of him wished he had an excuse to let her keep it. "Thank you for taking good care of it." "Thank you for letting me use it," Amelia replied, and the way she looked at him made his heart beat faster. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not come along." "I am just glad I was there," Frank said honestly. He stayed for dinner at Thomas and Catherine's insistence, eating beef stew and fresh bread while the rain continued to fall outside. The conversation flowed easily, with Amelia telling stories about their childhood back in Pennsylvania and Frank sharing tales about life on the ranch. He found himself watching Amelia as she talked, noticing the way her eyes lit up when she laughed, the graceful movement of her hands as she gestured to emphasize a point. When the rain finally began to ease up around sunset, Frank knew he had to go. He had cattle to sell, business to attend to. But leaving that warm, friendly room felt harder than it should have. "Come back and visit," Catherine said as Frank prepared to leave. "You are always welcome here." "I will," Frank promised, then turned to Amelia. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Miss Vaughn." "Amelia, please," she said. "And the pleasure was mine, Frank." Their eyes met and held for a long moment, and Frank felt that shift in his chest again, like something was rearranging itself deep inside him. Then he tipped his hat to all of them and stepped out into the wet evening. The streets of Calico were full of people celebrating the rain, even though it was getting dark. Frank made his way to the livery stable where he planned to board his horse for the night, his mind full of honey-colored eyes and a smile that somehow seemed connected to the miracle of rain after months of drought. He told himself he was being foolish. They had just met. She was probably just being polite, grateful for his help. But even as he tried to rationalize his feelings, Frank knew something significant had happened on that dusty road. Something that went beyond simple attraction or gratitude. That night, lying in a rented room above the saloon, listening to the steady patter of rain on the roof, Frank could not stop thinking about Amelia Vaughn. The next morning dawned clear and fresh, with the smell of wet earth permeating everything. Frank conducted his business at the cattle auction, getting a better price than he had expected thanks to the rain lifting everyone's spirits. He should have headed straight back to his ranch to start making repairs and preparations for what he hoped would be a better season. Instead, he found his feet carrying him toward the general store. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and Amelia looked up from where she was arranging a display of fabric bolts. Her face brightened when she saw him, and Frank felt warmth spread through his chest. "Good morning," she said. "I was hoping you might stop by before you left town." "Were you?" Frank asked, feeling bold. "Yes," Amelia said simply, and there was no coyness in her tone, no game playing, just honest admission. "I wanted to thank you properly. Yesterday everything happened so fast, and I do not think I expressed how grateful I am." "You thanked me plenty," Frank assured her. "Still," Amelia said, setting down the fabric she was holding, "I would like to do something for you. Maybe I could make you dinner sometime. I am a fairly good cook, or at least I was back home. I am sure I can manage something with what Thomas has in stock here." Frank should have said no. He should have recognized that he was a struggling rancher with an uncertain future, that getting involved with someone was a complication he could not afford. But when he looked at Amelia, all those practical thoughts evaporated like morning dew under the desert sun. "I would like that very much," he heard himself say. Amelia's resulting smile made him feel like he had just won a fortune. They arranged for Frank to return to Calico the following Sunday. It was not a long ride from his ranch, maybe 2 hours on a good horse, but Frank found himself counting down the days like a schoolboy. He threw himself into work, using his proceeds from the cattle sale to buy supplies and start repairing fences that had fallen into disrepair. The rain had brought new life to the land, with green shoots already starting to push through the earth. His remaining cattle looked healthier, more energetic. Everything was looking up, but none of it compared to the anticipation he felt about seeing Amelia again. Sunday arrived with perfect weather, warm but not oppressive, with white clouds dotting a brilliant blue sky. Frank bathed in the creek that ran through his property, now flowing with fresh water from the rain, and put on his best shirt and pants. He even trimmed his beard and combed his hair, taking more care with his appearance than he had in years. The ride to Calico seemed to take forever and no time at all. When Frank arrived at the general store, Thomas greeted him with a knowing smile. "She has been cooking since dawn," Thomas said in a low voice. "Fair warning, she is nervous as a cat." That information made Frank feel better about his own nervousness. "Where is she?" "Upstairs. We have a small apartment above the store. Catherine and I will make ourselves scarce for the evening, give you two some privacy to talk." Frank climbed the narrow stairs to the apartment above the store, his heart hammering in his chest. He knocked on the door, and Amelia answered almost immediately. She was wearing a dress he had not seen before, a soft green color that brought out the amber in her eyes. Her hair was pinned up in an intricate style that must have taken her hours to complete. She looked beautiful, and Frank told her so, making her blush. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. I hope you are hungry." The apartment was small but cozy, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living area, and what looked like 2 bedroom doors leading off to the sides. The table was set for 2, and wonderful smells were coming from the stove. "It smells amazing," Frank said honestly. They sat down to eat, and the food was even better than it smelled. Amelia had made roasted chicken with potatoes and carrots, and there was fresh bread that she admitted Catherine had helped her with that morning. As they ate, they talked, and Frank marveled at how easy it was to be with her. Amelia told him about growing up in Pennsylvania, about her mother's long illness and her decision to come west after the funeral. "I needed a change," she explained. "Everything back home reminded me of her." Thomas wrote that Arizona was beautiful, that there were opportunities here. "I needed something new, a fresh start." "Do you think you will stay?" Frank asked, surprised by how much her answer mattered to him. "I think so," Amelia said, meeting his eyes. "I like it here. The land is different from what I am used to, harsher maybe, but there is a beauty to it, and the people have been kind." She paused, then added softly, "Especially you." Frank felt his face grow warm. "I have not done anything special." "You gave me your hat," Amelia said. "In the blazing sun, without a moment's hesitation. You could have just given me water and directions to town, but you gave me something of yourself. That meant something to me." "I am glad," Frank said, "because meeting you, it has meant something to me too." The conversation continued long after they finished eating. They moved to the small sitting area, talking about everything and nothing, laughing at shared jokes and comfortable in the silences between words. Frank told her about his ranch, about his dreams of building it into something his father would have been proud of. Amelia talked about wanting to help her brother's business grow, about learning to navigate this new territory she now called home. When Frank finally left as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, he knew without a doubt that he was falling in love with Amelia Vaughn. Over the following weeks, Frank found excuses to come to Calico every chance he got. Sometimes it was legitimate business, supplies he needed from Thomas's store. Other times, he simply wanted to see Amelia. They would take walks around town or sit on the porch of the general store in the evening, watching the world go by and talking about their days. The town noticed, of course. In a place as small as Calico, everything was noticed, but the attention was mostly positive. People liked Frank, respected him as a hard worker who had stayed through the tough times. And they had taken to Amelia quickly, appreciating her warm nature and willingness to help anyone who came into the store. The only person who seemed less than pleased was a man named Gerald Morton. He was a successful rancher who owned land adjacent to Frank's property, a man in his early 40s who had made it clear he was interested in courting Amelia. He had money and influence, and he was not shy about using both. Frank first encountered Morton's displeasure about a month after meeting Amelia. He was leaving the general store after an afternoon spent helping Amelia organize stock when Morton rode up on a magnificent black horse that probably cost more than Frank made in a year. "Sawyer," Morton said, his tone making Frank's name sound like an insult. "I hear you have been spending a lot of time in town lately. Must be nice to have leisure time. Some of us have actual ranches to run." Frank kept his expression neutral. "My ranch is doing just fine, Morton." "The rain helped everyone, did it?" Morton's smile did not reach his eyes. "I heard you had to sell off most of your stock. That does not sound like doing fine to me." "I have what I need," Frank replied evenly. Morton's gaze shifted to the general store, where Amelia was visible through the window. Pretty girl, that Amelia Vaughn. Too good for a small-timer like you, though. She needs someone who can provide for her properly. Frank felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "I think Amelia can decide for herself what she needs." "We will see about that," Morton said, then rode off without another word. That evening, Frank told Amelia about the encounter. They were sitting on the porch of the store, the main street quiet in the fading light. Amelia listened with a frown. "Gerald Morton has been coming around," she admitted. "He brings gifts, expensive things, perfume from San Francisco, jewelry, once even a bolt of silk. Thomas thinks I should consider his interest seriously. He is wealthy, established." "But," she turned to look at Frank, "I do not feel anything when I am with him. He talks at me, not to me. He has never asked what I want or what I think. With you it is different." "How so?" Frank asked, his heart beating faster. "With you I feel seen," Amelia said simply. "You listen when I talk. You care about my opinions. When I am with you I feel like I can be myself, not just some prize to be won." Frank reached out and took her hand, marveling at how right it felt. "You are not a prize, Amelia. You are a person, a remarkable one. And spending time with you is the best part of my week." "Just the week?" Amelia asked, and there was a teasing note in her voice. "The month, the year, my whole life," Frank said, and he meant every word. Amelia's breath caught, and then she leaned in and kissed him. It was soft and sweet and perfect, and when they pulled apart, Frank felt like the world had shifted on its axis. "I am falling in love with you, Frank Sawyer," Amelia whispered. "I am already there," Frank replied and kissed her again. From that moment on, they were inseparable. Frank still had his ranch to manage, and Amelia had her duties at the store, but they found time for each other whenever possible. Frank taught Amelia to ride better, taking her out to his ranch to see the land he was working so hard to build up. Amelia shared her love of books with Frank, lending him novels from the store's small selection and discussing them with him for hours. But Morton did not give up. He continued to pursue Amelia aggressively, and his pursuit began to take on an edge that worried Frank. He would show up at the store at odd hours, insisting on speaking with Amelia alone. He sent more and more lavish gifts, each one seeming designed to emphasize the difference between his wealth and Frank's modest means. When Amelia refused his advances, he began to make veiled threats. "You should think carefully about your future," he told Amelia one day when Frank was not there. Thomas recounted the conversation to Frank later, his face worried. "A woman needs security. Sawyer cannot give you that. His ranch is barely profitable. One bad season and he will lose everything." "Then where will you be?" "I can make my own choices," Amelia had replied firmly. "And I have made my choice." Morton's expression had darkened. "You are making a mistake, but do not worry. When Sawyer fails, and he will fail, I will still be here. I am a patient man." The threat hung over them like a cloud, but Frank tried not to let it worry him too much. He had his ranch to think about, and it was finally starting to thrive. The rain had continued to come periodically, not as dramatically as that first day, but enough to keep the land green and the cattle healthy. Frank was even able to buy back some of the stock he had sold, slowly building his herd back up. Then, one evening in late autumn, Frank rode to Calico with a specific purpose. He had been carrying his grandmother's ring in his pocket for a week, waiting for the right moment. It was a simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing as fancy as what Morton could afford, but it had been in his family for generations, and it was all he had to offer. He found Amelia behind the store, sitting on a crate and watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. She smiled when she saw him, and Frank felt his courage solidify. "Amelia," he said, dismounting and walking over to her, "I need to talk to you." Something in his tone made her stand up, her expression growing serious. "Is everything all right?" "Better than all right," Frank said. He took her hands in his, feeling them tremble slightly. "I know we have not known each other long, just a few months. But in that time, you have become the most important person in my world. I think about you constantly. When something good happens, you are the first person I want to tell. When something goes wrong, you are the one I want to turn to. You make me want to be a better man, to build something worth having. And I know I do not have much to offer. My ranch is small and I am not wealthy. But I love you, Amelia. I love you with everything I am. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." He knelt down in the dirt, still holding her hands, and pulled out the ring. "Amelia Vaughn, will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Amelia's face, but she was smiling brighter than he had ever seen. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Frank, 1,000 times yes." Frank stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply while the sunset blazed around them. When they finally pulled apart, he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "I know it is not much," Frank started to say, but Amelia cut him off. "It is perfect. You are perfect. I do not care about fancy things or wealth. I just want you, Frank. I want the life we can build together." They went inside to tell Thomas and Catherine, who were thrilled. Catherine cried happy tears and immediately started planning the wedding, while Thomas clapped Frank on the back and welcomed him to the family. "I am glad it is you," Thomas said quietly while the women talked excitedly about wedding details. "You are a good man, Frank. You will take care of her." "With my life," Frank promised, but their happiness was short-lived. 2 days later, Frank received a visit at his ranch from Gerald Morton. The man rode up with 2 of his ranch hands, all of them armed. "Congratulations on your engagement," Morton said, though his tone suggested anything but congratulations. "I heard the news in town. Everyone is talking about it." "Thank you," Frank said carefully. He was standing on his porch, within reach of his rifle if needed, but he hoped it would not come to that. "I wonder if you have really thought this through, though," Morton continued. "Marriage is expensive. A wife needs a house, not a shack. She needs nice things, security. Can you really provide that on this piece of dirt you call a ranch?" "My ranch is doing fine," Frank said, feeling his temper rise. "And Amelia is not the kind of woman who cares about material things." "Every woman cares about material things," Morton said dismissively. "They just say they do not until reality hits. But that is not why I am here. I am here to make you an offer, a generous one." Frank waited, saying nothing. "I want to buy your land," Morton said. "I will pay you fair market value, maybe even a little more. You take the money, marry your girl, and move somewhere else. Start fresh. It is a good deal, Sawyer." "My land is not for sale," Frank said flatly. Morton's expression hardened. "I think you should reconsider. You are surrounded by my property on 3 sides. It would be very easy for me to make things difficult for you. Cattle could wander onto my land and get lost. Fences could get damaged. Accidents could happen. It would be a shame if something were to interfere with your wedding plans." Frank felt ice in his veins. "Are you threatening me?" "I am giving you sound advice," Morton said. "Think about it, Sawyer. You have 3 days to accept my offer. After that, well, I cannot guarantee what might happen." He rode off, leaving Frank standing on his porch with dread in his gut. Frank immediately rode to Calico to tell Amelia and Thomas what had happened. They gathered in the apartment above the store, the mood somber. "He cannot do this," Amelia said angrily. "There must be laws against this kind of thing." "There are," Thomas said, "but proving anything would be difficult. Morton has money and influence. He could tie us up in legal battles for years, and Frank does not have the resources for that." "So what do we do?" Amelia asked, looking at Frank with worried eyes. Frank took her hand. "We do not give in. That land is my father's legacy. I am not selling it to a bully like Morton, no matter what threats he makes. But what if he follows through? Amelia asked. What if he hurts you or sabotages your ranch? Then we deal with it, Frank said firmly. Together. We are not running from this. The next 3 days were tense. Frank stayed at his ranch, keeping his rifle close and sleeping lightly. Thomas hired a man to watch the general store at night, and Amelia was not allowed to go anywhere alone. The whole town seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen. On the 3rd day, Frank was working on repairing a section of fence when he saw smoke rising in the distance. His heart dropped. The smoke was coming from the direction of his barn. He ran, his boots pounding against the earth, but by the time he reached the structure, flames were already consuming the old wood. His tools were in there, his winter hay stores, everything he needed to keep his ranch running. Frank tried to fight the fire with buckets of water from the well, but it was useless. The barn was gone within an hour, reduced to smoldering ash and charred timber. Standing in the ruins, Frank felt despair wash over him. This was exactly what Morton had threatened. And without a barn, without his stored supplies, Frank did not know how he would make it through the winter. But then he heard horses approaching. He turned, expecting to see Morton coming to gloat, but instead he saw half the town of Calico riding up his drive. Thomas was in the lead, with tools and lumber loaded on wagons. Behind him came the blacksmith, the doctor, the saloon owner, farmers and ranch hands and townsfolk, all coming to help. We heard what happened, Thomas said, dismounting. Figured you could use some help. Frank felt emotion tighten his throat. I cannot afford to pay you all. Nobody is asking for pay, the blacksmith, a burly man named Jim, said gruffly. We are a community, we take care of our own. Besides, he added with a meaningful look, we all know who is really behind this. Morton has been pushing people around for too long. It is time someone stood up to him. And so they did. Over the next week, the people of Calico came together to rebuild Frank's barn. They brought supplies, labor, and encouragement. Amelia was there every day, working alongside the men even when Catherine protested that it was not proper. She helped measure wood, held boards in place while others hammered, and kept everyone fed with meals she prepared in Frank's small kitchen. In the evening, after everyone else had left, Frank and Amelia would sit together on his porch, exhausted but happy. I cannot believe everyone came, Frank said one night. I do not deserve this kind of support. Yes, you do, Amelia said firmly. You stayed when others left. You work hard. You are kind. People see that, Frank. They value it. Morton is not going to be happy about this, Frank said. He wanted to break me, and instead the whole town came to my defense. Let him be unhappy, Amelia said. We have each other and we have friends. That is what matters. The barn was completed in just under 2 weeks, and it was better than the old one had been. Sturdier, more weather-resistant with a better layout for Frank's needs. When it was finished, Thomas organized a barn dance to celebrate, inviting the whole town to Frank's ranch for a party. It was a beautiful evening, with music and dancing and more food than Frank had seen in months. People were laughing and celebrating, and Frank stood on his newly built porch watching it all with wonder. His hand was linked with Amelia's, and he kept looking down at her, still amazed that this remarkable woman had agreed to be his wife. Then Gerald Morton showed up. He rode in with his same 2 ranch hands, all 3 of them armed. The music stopped. People moved aside, creating a clear space in the yard. Frank felt Amelia tense beside him, but he squeezed her hand reassuringly and stepped forward. This is a private party, Morton, Frank said evenly. You are not welcome here. Is that so? Morton looked around at all the townspeople, his expression contemptuous. You all think you are so clever, building his barn, throwing your little party. But you are just delaying the inevitable. Sawyer is going to fail. His ranch will crumble and all your efforts will be for nothing. The only thing crumbling around here is your reputation. Thomas stepped forward, standing beside Frank. Everyone knows you burned down his barn. Everyone knows you have been threatening him, trying to force him off his land. We are all sick of your bullying, Morton. Careful, shopkeeper, Morton said, his hand moving toward his gun. You are talking to the biggest landowner in this valley. Land does not make a man, Jim the blacksmith said, moving to Frank's other side. Character does, and you have shown what kind of man you are. More people moved forward, forming a wall of support behind Frank. Men, women, even some of the older children. They stood together, unified in their rejection of Morton's intimidation. Morton looked around at all of them, his face reddening with anger. You will all regret this, he said. Every single one of you. I do not think so, said a new voice. Sheriff William Cooper had arrived, his badge glinting in the lamplight. In fact, Mr. Morton, I think you are the one with regrets in your future. I have been doing some investigating, and I have 2 witnesses who saw you and your men near Sawyer's barn the night it burned. That is arson, which is a serious crime. Morton's face went pale. You cannot prove anything. I have witnesses and evidence, the sheriff said calmly. You are under arrest. You can come peacefully or we can do this the hard way. Your choice. For a moment, it looked like Morton might actually go for his gun. Frank tensed, ready to dive in front of Amelia if shooting started. But then Morton's shoulders sagged. He knew he was beaten. The sheriff's men took him and his ranch hands into custody, and as they rode away, the whole party erupted in cheers. The music started up again, louder and more joyful than before. Frank turned to Amelia and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed. It is over, she said, clinging to him. It is really over. The beginning is just starting, Frank replied, and kissed her in front of everyone, not caring who saw. They were married 3 weeks later in a ceremony held in the church at Calico. It was a small building, barely big enough to hold all the people who wanted to attend, but somehow they all squeezed in. Amelia wore a white dress that Catherine had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers that had bloomed after the autumn rains. Frank wore his best suit, which Thomas had helped him pick out, and his father's hat, which he had cleaned and shaped for the occasion. When Amelia walked down the aisle toward him, Frank felt his eyes grow wet. She was so beautiful, so perfect, and she was choosing him. Him, a struggling rancher with more determination than sense. He felt like the luckiest man alive. The ceremony was simple, but heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to stand by each other through good times and bad, through drought and flood, through whatever life threw at them. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Frank kissed Amelia with all the love in his heart, and the church erupted in applause. The reception was held at the ranch, in the new barn that stood as a testament to community and perseverance. There was music and dancing and so much food that Frank wondered how they would ever eat it all. Thomas gave a speech that made Amelia cry happy tears, and Jim the blacksmith told embarrassing stories about Frank that made everyone laugh. As the sun set and the stars came out, Frank and Amelia danced alone in the center of the barn while everyone watched. The fiddler played a slow, sweet tune, and Frank held his wife close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her body against his. "Happy," he whispered. "More than I ever thought possible," Amelia replied. "When I came to Arizona, I was running from grief. I thought I was coming here to hide, to start over in a place where nothing reminded me of what I had lost. But instead, I found you. I found home." "You are my home," Frank said. "Wherever you are, that is where I belong." They kissed, and somewhere in the distance, Frank heard the rumble of thunder. He looked up to see clouds gathering, backlit by the setting sun. Rain began to fall, gentle and warm, pattering against the barn roof and creating music of its own. The guests laughed and cheered, running for cover or simply tilting their faces up to receive the blessing of water. Frank and Amelia stayed in the center of the barn, still swaying to the music, wrapped in each other's arms. "It is raining again," Amelia said, smiling up at him. "Just like the day we met." "You bring the rain," Frank said. "Your smile, your joy, it changes everything. That first day when I gave you my hat and you smiled at me, the rain came, and it keeps coming every time you are happy." "That is silly," Amelia said, but she was still smiling. "Rain is rain. It has nothing to do with me." "Does it not?" Frank challenged gently. "The drought broke the day we met. Every time something good happens, when you laugh or smile or we are happy together, it rains. I do not understand it and I do not need to. I just know that you are magic, Amelia Sawyer. You brought life back to this valley and you brought life back to me." Amelia kissed him again, deeply and sweetly, and the rain fell harder, drumming against the earth, soaking into the parched ground, bringing with it the promise of growth and abundance and hope. Their first year of marriage was everything Frank had hoped for and more. The rains continued to come regularly, always seeming to arrive when they most needed it. The ranch thrived. Frank was able to expand his herd, repair his house, and even hire a couple of ranch hands to help with the work. Amelia proved to be an invaluable partner, keeping the books, managing the household, and often working right alongside Frank when an extra pair of hands was needed. But more than the material success, Frank treasured the small moments, waking up each morning with Amelia beside him, sharing meals at the table his father had built, sitting on the porch in the evening, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched the sun set over their land, reading together by lamplight, her voice bringing characters and stories to life, making love in their bedroom, learning each other's bodies and hearts with tenderness and passion. In the spring of their second year together, Amelia told Frank she was pregnant. He was in the barn, mucking out stalls when she came to find him. She did not say anything at first, just stood there with a smile playing at her lips and her hands clasped in front of her. "What?" Frank asked, setting down his pitchfork. "Why are you looking at me like that?" "I have news," Amelia said. "Good news." Understanding dawned on Frank's face. Are we? "We are going to have a baby," Amelia confirmed, and her smile broke free, radiant and joyful. Frank let out a whoop of pure happiness and scooped Amelia up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests that he would make her dizzy. He set her down carefully, then knelt in front of her, pressing his ear against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there," he said softly. "This is your father. I cannot wait to meet you." Amelia ran her fingers through Frank's hair, her touch gentle and loving. "You are going to be an amazing father." "I hope so," Frank said, looking up at her. "I want to give our child everything, a good home, a loving family, a better world than the one we have known." "You will," Amelia assured him. "We will together." That night as they lay in bed, Frank's hand resting on Amelia's stomach, rain began to fall outside. Not a storm, just a gentle, steady rain that would soak into the earth and nourish the growing things. "There it is again," Frank said. "Your joy bringing the rain." Amelia laughed softly. "You and your superstitions." "It is not superstition if it is true," Frank insisted. "I have been keeping track. Every significant happy moment we have shared, it has rained within hours. Your smile brings rain to the valley, Amelia. It is magic." "If it is magic, then it is our magic," Amelia said. "Yours and mine together. This happiness, this life, we built it together." Frank could not argue with that. The pregnancy was not easy. Amelia suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon. And as she grew larger, The Arizona heat became difficult for her to bear. Frank did everything he could to make her comfortable, bringing her cool water, fanning her on the hottest days, rubbing her swollen feet in the evening. He took over more of the household chores, insisting that she rest, though Amelia resisted, not liking to feel useless. "You are growing our child," Frank told her when she complained about being unable to do more. "That is the most important job in the world right now." In late autumn, when the leaves were turning gold and the air had finally cooled, Amelia went into labor. Catherine came to help, along with the town doctor, and Frank paced outside the bedroom door, listening to Amelia's cries and feeling utterly helpless. The labor lasted 12 hours. 12 hours of Frank imagining everything that could go wrong, praying to a God he had not talked to much since his father died, making bargains and promises if only Amelia and the baby would be all right. Then he heard a baby crying, strong and loud and perfect. The bedroom door opened and Catherine came out, her face exhausted but smiling. "You have a son," she said. "Both mother and baby are healthy. You can come in now." Frank practically ran into the room. Amelia was propped up in bed, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, looking more tired than Frank had ever seen her. But she was smiling, and in her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. "Come meet your son," Amelia said softly. Frank approached carefully, almost afraid he might break something. He looked down at the baby and felt his entire world shift. The child was tiny, red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right through him. "Can I hold him?" Frank asked, his voice rough with emotion. Amelia carefully transferred the baby to Frank's arms. He felt so small, so fragile, and yet so perfect. Frank looked down at his son and felt tears streaming down his face. "Hello," he whispered. "Hello, little one, I am your father. And I promise I am going to do everything I can to be worthy of you." The baby made a small sound, something between a sigh and a whimper, and Frank felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. They named him Frederick, after Frank's father, with the middle name Thomas for Amelia's brother. Little Frederick was a healthy baby who loved to eat and sleep and stare at the world with wide, curious eyes. Frank found himself constantly amazed by the small miracle of his son. The tiny fingers that would grip Frank's larger ones. The way Frederick's face would scrunch up before he cried. The weight of him sleeping against Frank's chest. "I did not know I could love anything this much," Frank confessed to Amelia one night as they watched Frederick sleep in the cradle Frank had built. "I thought what I felt for you was the limit of my heart. But it is even more." "It is not more," Amelia corrected gently. "It is different, but it is just as deep, just as true. We made him together, Frank. He is the physical embodiment of our love." Frank pulled Amelia close, kissing the top of her head. "I am so grateful for you, for this life, for everything." That night it rained. Not heavily, but steady and sure. A rain that would feed the crops and fill the streams and keep their land thriving. Frederick grew into a curious, energetic toddler who loved helping his father around the ranch. He would toddle after Frank, imitating everything he did, and Frank would patiently show him how to care for the horses, how to mend fences, how to read the sky for signs of weather. Amelia would watch them together, her hand resting on her stomach where another child was growing, and feel contentment so profound it sometimes brought tears to her eyes. Their second child, a daughter they named Margaret after Frank's mother, arrived 2 years after Frederick. She was smaller and quieter than her brother had been, with amber eyes exactly like Amelia's and a disposition so sweet that everyone who met her fell in love immediately. The ranch continued to prosper. What Frank had built became known throughout the territory, as one of the most successful operations in the region, not because it was the largest, but because it was so well managed. People came to Frank for advice, and he was always generous with his knowledge, remembering how the community had supported him when Morton had tried to destroy him. Speaking of Morton, the man had been convicted of arson and served 2 years in prison. When he was released, he left Arizona entirely, and his ranch was sold to a family from California who proved to be good neighbors. As the years passed, Frank and Amelia's family grew. They had 2 more children, a boy named Daniel and another girl named Rebecca. The house that had once seemed too big for just Frank now bulged with life and noise and love. There were toys scattered across the floor, children's laughter ringing through the rooms, and a sense of joy that permeated everything. Thomas and Catherine never had children of their own, but they doted on their nieces and nephews, spoiling them shamelessly and always available to help when needed. The general store continued to thrive, becoming a cornerstone of Calico's economy, and Thomas became mayor, helping to guide the town through the changing times as the Wild West gradually became less wild. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Frank took Amelia back to the spot where they had first met, that stretch of road where her wagon had broken down all those years ago. The valley looked different now, green and lush from years of regular rainfall, barely recognizable as the drought-stricken wasteland it had once been. "I think about that day often," Amelia said as they stood together, hand in hand. "How scared I was, how hopeless I felt. And then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I had not even known to say." "I was just a man on a horse," Frank said. "No," Amelia disagreed. "You were so much more than that. You were kind when you did not have to be, generous when you had so little to give. You saw me, really saw me, not as a prize or a burden but as a person worthy of respect and care. That was the moment I started falling in love with you, Frank, when you gave me your hat in the blazing sun and asked for nothing in return." Frank pulled his wife close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her body against his. She fit against him perfectly, just as she always had. "That smile you gave me," he said, "when I put that hat on your head, it changed everything. The world became brighter." The rain came. Life came back to the valley. "You brought magic, Amelia. You still do every single day." "It is not magic," Amelia said, but she was smiling. "It is love, our love. It was strong enough to change things, to bring new life where there was only death and drought." "Then love is magic," Frank said and kissed her. As they kissed, clouds gathered overhead and rain began to fall, warm and gentle, christening the valley where their love story had begun. 20 years after their first meeting, Frank and Amelia stood on their porch watching the sun set over land that was now prosperous and lush. Their children were grown or nearly so. Frederick, at 20, was already taking over much of the ranch management, showing the same dedication and work ethic his father had. Margaret was 18, training to be a teacher and planning to open a school in Calico. Daniel, 16, had shown an unexpected talent for working with horses and was building a reputation as one of the best trainers in the territory. Rebecca, the baby at 14, was the spitting image of her mother and showed the same head for business, often helping her Uncle Thomas at the general store. Frank's hair was starting to gray at the temples, and Amelia had laugh lines around her eyes, but Frank thought she was more beautiful than ever. Life had shaped them, matured them, but their love had only grown deeper and stronger with time. "You ever regret it?" Frank asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Coming west, marrying me, the life we built here. It has not always been easy." Amelia turned to look at him, her expression incredulous. "Regret, Frank, how could I regret the best decision I ever made? Yes, life has been hard sometimes. We have struggled with money, with drought, with illness, with all the challenges that come with ranching and raising a family. But I have never, not for one single moment, regretted choosing you, choosing us. I just want to make sure you are happy, Frank said. That has always been my goal. To make you as happy as you made me. I am happy, Amelia assured him. Look at what we built together. Not just the ranch, though that is impressive enough, but our family, our life, our love. We took nothing and made it into everything. That is what I am most proud of, Frank. Not the success or the prosperity, but the fact that we did it together, that we never gave up on each other. Frank pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. You know what I realized the other day? It has been raining regularly for 20 years now, ever since we met. The drought that plagued this area for so long, it ended the day you smiled at me. Some people might call that coincidence, but I know better. Oh, Frank, Amelia laughed. You are still going on about that. Because it is true, Frank insisted. Your joy, your love, it changed the very weather. You brought rain to this valley, and you brought life to my heart. Those are facts as real as the ground beneath our feet. Amelia turned in his arms to face him, her amber eyes shining with tears and love. If that is true, if my smile really did bring the rain, then you are the one who gave me reason to smile. Before you, I was lost and grieving. You gave me your hat in the blazing sun. You gave me shelter and kindness. You gave me love and a home and a reason to believe in happiness again. So if I brought the rain, it is only because you taught me how. They kissed as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson and deep purple. And as always, as if summoned by their love, clouds gathered and rain began to fall, gentle and nourishing, feeding the land and filling the streams and keeping the valley green and alive. Their children came out onto the porch, drawn by the sound of the rain, and they all stood together as a family, watching the water fall from the sky like a blessing. Frederick had his arm around a young woman from town, a rancher's daughter he was courting. Margaret was reading a book by lamplight. Daniel was whittling a piece of wood, his hands already showing the calluses of a working man. Rebecca was leaning against her mother, content to simply be present in the moment. Frank looked at all of them, his family, the legacy he and Amelia had built together, and felt peace settle over him. This was what mattered. Not wealth or status or power, but love. The love between a husband and wife, the love of parents for their children, the love of a community that supported each other through hard times and celebrated together in good times. Tell us again, Rebecca said suddenly, how you and Mother met. Oh, you have heard that story 100 times, Amelia protested. But I never get tired of it, Rebecca insisted, and her siblings echoed her sentiment. So Frank told the story once more, with Amelia interjecting corrections and additions, the two of them painting a picture of a scorching day, a broken wagon wheel, and an act of simple kindness that had changed everything. He told them about giving away his hat, about Amelia's smile, about the miraculous rain that followed. The children listened raptly, even though they knew every word, because it was more than just a story. It was their origin story, the beginning of their family, proof that love could transform lives and change the world itself. When the story was finished and the rain had slowed to a gentle mist, the children drifted off to their various activities, leaving Frank and Amelia alone on the porch once more. We did good, Frank said quietly. We did, Amelia agreed. And we are not done yet. We have years ahead of us still. Grandchildren to meet, more adventures to share. As long as I am with you, I am ready for anything, Frank said. The years continued to pass, bringing with them all the joys and sorrows that make up a life. Frederick married his sweetheart and took over the ranch completely, allowing Frank to step back and enjoy a slower pace. Margaret opened her school and became beloved by her students. Daniel started his own horse training business and quickly gained a reputation throughout the territory. Rebecca helped Thomas expand the general store into a thriving mercantile that served the growing town of Calico. Frank and Amelia became grandparents, delighting in the arrival of each new baby. They spoiled their grandchildren the way Thomas and Catherine had spoiled their children, telling stories and giving treats and always available for comfort or advice. The rain continued to come regularly, keeping the valley green and prosperous. Old-timers in Calico would sometimes talk about the drought years, shaking their heads at the memory of that desperate time. And they would always mention how it had ended, how rain had fallen the day that Frank Sawyer gave his hat to a stranger and fell in love. Some called it legend. Some called it coincidence. But everyone agreed that something special had happened that day, something that had changed the valley forever. On their 50th wedding anniversary, Frank and Amelia's entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were children and grandchildren everywhere, filling the house and yard with noise and laughter. A huge meal was prepared, with tables set up under the trees where everyone could eat together. There was music and dancing and storytelling, a celebration of love and family and life itself. Frank, now 76, his hair white and his body showing the wear of decades of hard work, stood to make a speech. Amelia sat beside him, her own hair silver and her face lined with age, but her amber eyes still bright and full of life. 50 years ago, Frank began, his voice still strong despite his age, I met a woman on a dusty road. Her wagon was broken, she was suffering from the heat and she needed help. I gave her water and my hat, and she gave me a smile that changed my life. That smile brought rain to a valley dying of drought, and it brought hope to a heart that had forgotten how to dream. Amelia, you are the love of my life. You are my partner, my best friend, the mother of my children and grandmother to my grandchildren. Every day with you has been a gift. Every morning I wake up beside you is a blessing. I would not trade a single moment of our life together, not the hard times or the good times, because every moment was spent with you. I love you more today than I did 50 years ago, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. There was not a dry eye in the crowd as Frank sat down. Amelia stood, her legs a bit unsteady but her spirit unbroken, and took Frank's hand. You gave me your hat, she said simply, her voice thick with emotion. Such a small gesture, but it meant everything. It meant you saw me, cared about me, valued me as a person worthy of kindness. And from that small gesture grew this. She gestured to the crowd of family surrounding them. All of this, our children, our grandchildren, this ranch, this life, it all came from a moment of compassion on a hot day. Frank, you taught me that love is not just a feeling but a choice, an action, something we do every single day. You have chosen to love me every day for 50 years, and I have chosen to love you right back. Thank you for being the man I knew you were from that very first moment. Thank you for this beautiful life. They kissed, and their family erupted in cheers and applause. And as if on cue, clouds gathered overhead and rain began to fall, a gentle summer rain that felt like a benediction. Frank lived to be 82 years old. He passed peacefully in his sleep one autumn night, with Amelia holding his hand and their children gathered around his bed. His last words were, "It has been a good life. Thank you." The entire town of Calico turned out for his funeral. People came from all over the territory to pay their respects to a man who had been a friend, a neighbor, a mentor to so many. They told stories about his kindness, his work ethic, his dedication to family and community. They talked about the day the drought ended, about his love story with Amelia, about the legacy he left behind. Amelia stood by his grave, dry-eyed but hollow, feeling like part of her soul had been torn away. Frank had been her companion for 54 years. She did not know how to exist without him. But she had her children and grandchildren, and they rallied around her, making sure she was never alone, that she always felt loved and valued. They moved her into town, into a comfortable house near the general store where Rebecca and her husband now worked. Amelia spent her days helping in the store, visiting with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and keeping Frank's memory alive through stories. She lived for another 8 years, reaching the age of 87. In those years, she saw 2 more great-grandchildren born, saw Margaret's school expand, saw the ranch continue to thrive under Frederick's management. She saw Calico grow from a small frontier town into a proper city, with electric lights and regular train service and all the trappings of modern life. But more than any of that, she held onto the memories of her life with Frank. The day they met, their first kiss, their wedding, the birth of each of their children, the quiet moments on the porch watching the sunset, the way he had looked at her every single day like she was the most precious thing in the world. On the last day of her life, Amelia asked to be taken back to the ranch, to the spot where she and Frank had first met. Her grandchildren carefully transported her there, setting up a chair so she could sit comfortably and look out over the valley. It was summer and the valley was green and beautiful, a far cry from the barren landscape it had been so many decades ago. Amelia sat in her chair, her eyes taking in every detail, remembering. "Tell us the story, grandmother," one of her great-grandchildren asked. "About how you and grandfather met." So Amelia told the story one last time, about the broken wagon, the blazing sun, the handsome cowboy who gave her his hat, about the smile she gave him and the rain that followed, about falling in love against a backdrop of drought and struggle, and building a life that exceeded her wildest dreams. "Was it really magic?" the child asked when she finished. "Did your smile really bring the rain?" Amelia smiled, the same smile that had captivated Frank all those years ago. "I do not know if it was magic or coincidence or simply the natural way of things. But I know this: love has power. Real, genuine love can transform people and places. It can bring life where there was none, hope where there was only despair. Your grandfather loved me and I loved him, and that love made everything possible. So maybe it was magic after all, the kind of magic that anyone can create if they are brave enough to open their hearts." She closed her eyes then, her smile still in place, and drifted off to sleep. She never woke up, passing peacefully into whatever comes next, where she hoped Frank was waiting for her. They buried her next to Frank, in a spot overlooking the valley they had loved so much. At the funeral, as the preacher spoke about eternal love and the promise of reunion in heaven, clouds gathered overhead. And as they lowered Amelia's casket into the ground, rain began to fall. It was a gentle rain, warm and soft, and it continued all through the day and into the night. The valley drank it in gratefully, and in the weeks that followed, wildflowers bloomed in unprecedented abundance, covering the hillsides in brilliant colors. People in Calico talked about it for years afterward. How the rain had come one last time, a final gift from Amelia Sawyer, a reminder that love never really dies. It transforms, it continues, it echoes through generations. The ranch continued under Frederick's management and was eventually passed down to his own children. The house remained in the family, each generation adding their own touches, but always preserving the core of what Frank and Amelia had built. The story of how they met, of the hat and the smile and the rain, became family legend, told and retold until it was impossible to separate fact from embellishment. But the essential truth remained. Two people had met on a dusty road during the worst drought Arizona had ever seen. An act of simple kindness had sparked a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. And from that love had come not just a family but a legacy of compassion, perseverance, and hope that touched everyone who heard their story. In Calico, where modern buildings now stood alongside the old frontier structures, where cars drove down streets that had once known only horses and wagons, there was a small park dedicated to Frank and Amelia Sawyer. A bronze statue showed them as they had been on that first day, Frank offering his hat, Amelia smiling up at him, both of them young and full of hope. At the base of the statue was a plaque that read, "He gave his hat. Her smile brought rain. Their love brought life. May we all be so blessed." And whenever there was a drought, whenever the rains failed to come and the valley began to suffer, people would visit that statue. They would touch the bronze hat, trace the lines of Amelia's smile, and remember that love has power. That kindness matters. That one small gesture of compassion can change everything. And more often than not, within a day or two, the rains would come again, gentle and nourishing, keeping the valley green and reminding everyone that some kinds of magic never fade. They simply transform into story, into memory, into the eternal truth that love endures beyond death, beyond time, beyond anything the world can throw at it. The Sawyer family continued to grow and prosper, generation after generation, each one carrying within them the legacy of Frank and Amelia. They were ranchers and teachers, business owners and artists, doctors and lawyers and craftsmen. They spread out across Arizona and beyond, but they all knew their story, all understood where they came from. And on anniversaries and birthdays and special occasions, they would gather at the ranch, now a sprawling operation that bore little resemblance to the struggling homestead Frank had once worked alone. They would stand in the spot where Frank and Amelia first met, where two lives had intersected and changed the course of history for an entire family. They would tell the story again, keeping it alive, passing it down to the next generation. And almost always, when the story was finished and the last word spoken, clouds would gather and rain would fall. A gentle reminder that love, true love, the kind that sees another person's need and responds without hesitation, the kind that grows and deepens and endures through every challenge, that kind of love really can work miracles. It really can bring rain to the valley. It really can transform lives. It really is magic.